At Christmas in 2020, everything changed. My younger sister grabbed my leather-bound planner off the coffee table and flipped it open without asking. Inside was a neatly typed summary of my finances, about $1 million saved through years of effort. Within minutes, my entire family had gathered around as if they'd uncovered sensitive evidence, and I, apparently, was the suspect. My name is Elena Ward, 38 years old, and for most of my life, my assignment in the family was predictable. Be dependable. Pick up the phone. Cover the emergency bills. Never mention how much it cost me to stay strong for everyone else. They assumed I worked an unremarkable job in a quiet corner of Santa Fe, nothing worth paying attention to. They had no idea what I had quietly built. When my sister Lila saw that number, she didn't ask how I earned it or why I'd never said a word. Her first assumption was immediate and entitled. The money should belong to her. She announced that I had always been comfortable, while she struggled, therefore, I owed her a better life. My parents didn't question her logic. They supported her, not me. Years of subtle favoritism solidified into open expectation. It wasn't a request for help. It was a plan for my savings to wipe out Lila's debts, fund her clean start, maybe even provide a down payment on a house she'd been eyeing outside Albuquerque. All of it built on work they'd never cared to understand. Standing in that living room with the tinsel shimmering behind them, I realized this moment wasn't new, it was the culmination of years of neglect. Long before the unraveling, the fractures had already begun. When I was 9, my mother gave birth to Lila months earlier than expected. Aunt Marjorie kept stacks of old crossword books in her hallway closet and let me fall asleep on her couch with the television humming softly in the background. But even then, I understood what it meant that my absence brought quiet, while my presence supposedly brought disruption. School quickly became the only place where I existed without being treated like a walking liability. I poured myself into every assignment, mostly because it gave me something that belonged entirely to me. Teachers called me diligent, self-driven, steady traits that at home were brushed aside as inconveniences. Each time I brought home a perfect score, my mother barely paused. My father offered a casual, "Nice work," the same tone he used for commenting on the weather. Their energy was saved for Lila, her sleep patterns, her sensitivities, her moods, her milestones. As she grew older, the urgency surrounding her never faded the way everyone predicted. She learned quickly that the world would adjust to whatever she needed. If she felt tired, she stayed home. If she missed a deadline, my mother secured an extension. If she forgot something, my father replaced it before she even noticed. I was expected to understand because she had been the fragile one, a label stretched far past its expiration. I tried to earn space through achievement. I joined clubs, volunteered in the library, organized classroom materials, anything to stay occupied. Nothing changed. In our house, praise was measured entirely in Lila's direction. When she tapped out a shaky melody on a classroom xylophone, my parents treated it as a triumph. Meanwhile, no event of mine was ever compelling enough for them to attend. What steadied me then was my grandmother. With her, I was simply Elena, someone whose thoughts mattered, not the background child. I learned how to slip out of rooms before anyone asked me to leave. I learned to depend on myself long before I understood what self-reliance truly meant. Somewhere inside that quiet survival strategy, a part of me stopped waiting for recognition that was never coming. By the time I entered my early teens, the rhythms of our home had settled into patterns I no longer bothered questioning. Middle school brought noise, responsibilities, and shifting friendships, but none of those belonged to my parents. Their world still revolved around Lila, who wore her early fragility like an all-access pass to exemption. If she misplaced homework, my mother blamed the teacher. If she forgot textbooks, my father drove across Santa Fe to collect them. Meanwhile, I learned to keep duplicates of everything, because if I didn't remember it myself, no one would. I spent most afternoons in the school library, not because I lacked friends, but because it was the only place where my mind could breathe. I straightened shelves, relabeled faded tags, and sorted returned books just to maintain a sense of order. Teachers thought I simply loved the quiet. It was deeper than that. The library was the only environment where nothing could be snatched away at someone else's whim. At home, Lila was discovering the currency of attention. She told stories embellished just enough to cast herself as either hero or victim. My mother believed every word, certain each minor conflict traced back to her difficult beginning. My father reinforced it by insisting she deserved special understanding. I watched how she thrived beneath that shelter, how easily she avoided stretching herself unless she chose to. Grandma remained the only adult who saw me clearly. Each weekend, she handed me paperwork from the rental unit behind her house, trusting me with tasks no one else even noticed existed. Lila blossomed socially, drifting from one hobby to another with effortless charm, never staying long enough to struggle. When she quit a sport, my parents called it exploring her options. When she dropped a class, they blamed the curriculum, not her commitment. I never had that luxury. If I wanted stability, I had to construct it myself, piece by piece. One memory from those years still stands out. I had stayed late helping a teacher reorganize her classroom. When I finally walked through our front door, arms full of materials the teacher no longer needed, my parents didn't look up. Lila had just announced she was auditioning for a school talent show, and the entire living room revolved around her excitement. I slipped past quietly, placing the donated supplies in my room, already understanding that my small accomplishment didn't qualify as news. By the end of 8th grade, I'd learned that invisibility, strangely enough, came with a kind of freedom. If no one expected anything from me, then everything I achieved belonged solely to me. I didn't have applause, but I didn't need permission either. Somewhere in the rhythm of organizing, categorizing, and holding myself together, I began forming a life built on skills no one else noticed. When high school began, the pace around me accelerated. Students scrambled to reinvent themselves, but I entered 9th grade already aware that my future depended on how quickly I could build an escape route. I never said that out loud, but each semester sharpened that quiet determination. I arrived early each day, using the calm to map deadlines and break tasks into manageable parts. Teachers noticed long before my parents ever did. At home, nothing changed. Lila hopped between leadership, theater, soccer, each attempt praised, each retreat forgiven. Meanwhile, I worked my first job at a small Santa Fe bookstore, reorganizing the overflowing storage stacks no one else wanted to tackle. The bookstore suited me. The work rewarded patience, careful observation, and a willingness to sort chaos into order. The owner trusted me quickly, letting me update their outdated catalog and reorganize the entire inventory system from scratch. It wasn't glamorous, but it unlocked something steady inside me. I liked creating solutions no one else had the patience to imagine. I saved every dollar I earned, tucking crisp bills into envelopes hidden beneath my bed. Each dollar meant possibility, and possibility meant distance. I didn't yet know exactly where I wanted to land, only that it needed to be far enough away that Lila couldn't recast my departure as another story about being abandoned. When college brochures began filling the guidance office, I treated them like research materials rather than daydreams. I compared programs, scholarship requirements, tuition costs, and living expenses. I built a spreadsheet mapping deadlines and financial aid timelines. My guidance counselor encouraged me to aim high, and for once, I allowed myself to believe that reaching didn't guarantee rejection. At home, my future rarely came up. Any mention of college prompted my parents to pivot toward Lila, whether she felt ready, supported, or overwhelmed. They discussed her next steps as if mine were background noise. I didn't challenge it. Silence had long become one of my sharpest tools. I completed every application alone: essays, forms, recommendations, transcripts. The first acceptance arrived in early spring, then another, and another. The one that mattered most came last. A university 3 states away, offering a full scholarship covering tuition, housing, meals, and supplies. When I opened the envelope, my hand trembled not from disbelief, but from clarity. My life could finally diverge from the path I'd been assigned. That night at dinner, I shared the news. My parents worried only about how my absence might affect Lila. She asked if she could have my room. Their detachment didn't hurt. It confirmed what I already knew. Leaving wasn't dramatic. It was necessary. It wasn't sentimental in the traditional sense, but the bookstore owner's parting gift felt like recognition, something I rarely received at home. When move-in day finally arrived for the university 3 states away, my parents said they couldn't take me because Lila had a volunteer event she didn't want to miss. I didn't argue. I packed my belongings into a borrowed car, drove the long stretch of highway alone, and arrived on a campus that felt impossibly open. As I carried the first box into my dorm, a quiet truth settled in. I had created this doorway myself, every step, every choice, every shift behind that bookstore counter. Standing inside the new room, sunlight spilling across unfamiliar walls, I felt something close to weightlessness, as if I'd stepped into a life that didn't require shrinking. Once college found its rhythm, freedom revealed itself not through grand revelations but small choices. Where I spent my time, what I studied, who I allowed near me. I majored in business analytics, drawn to its structure and logic. Numbers didn't dismiss me, and systems didn't overlook me. Everything responded to effort, consistency, and clarity, 3 things I'd been practicing since childhood. I gravitated toward projects requiring meticulous detail, especially financial modeling and asset tracking. The work reminded me of sorting grandma's rental records, only now the stakes were higher. I accepted every part-time position I could manage. My first campus job was digitizing decades of financial ledgers for the university archive. The material looked dull, but its hidden patterns fascinated me. I flagged inconsistencies, reorganized misfiled records, and streamlined entire sections without being asked. My supervisor noticed, giving me responsibilities usually reserved for graduate assistants. That foundation made perfect sense when, during sophomore year, I applied for a competitive internship at a private investment research firm. I expected nothing. When the acceptance arrived, I reread it twice, stunned by the possibility ahead. But I worked quickly. And the deeper I went, the more I realized I had a talent for spotting irregularities others overlooked. One afternoon, while reviewing a decades-old asset file, I discovered that a batch of municipal bond records had been miscategorized years earlier. Correcting the error led to a substantial recovery for a client, something the firm had missed for months. That moment shifted everything. Afterward, they trusted me with more complex assignments, not glamorous, but full of the puzzles I thrived on. I didn't tell my family any of this. Their calls remained infrequent, and when they did come, the conversations revolved entirely around Lila, her roommate troubles, shifting hobbies, or whatever reassurance she needed that week. My updates barely fit within the narrow space they allowed. When I mentioned my internship once, my mother simply said she hoped it wouldn't stress me out. My father warned me not to burn out over small tasks. Lila redirected the topic within seconds. Their distance no longer hurt. What surprised me was how little it mattered. It felt as though I had stepped out of a fog I never realized surrounded me. The more I invested in my work, the further I drifted from the girl who once chased their approval. When the internship ended, the firm asked me to continue remote project work during the school year. Each assignment sharpened my ability to uncover errors buried beneath decades of incomplete documentation. I built checklists, templates, and verification workflows that saved hours of labor. Soon the team relied on my methods even when I wasn't directly involved. By senior year, I'd carved a path without noticing. My experience led to conferences, networking, and eventually a full-time offer from a nationwide asset evaluation firm. I accepted immediately. Graduation felt quiet. Lila didn't attend. My parents offered brief congratulations. Instead of sadness, I felt clarity. I had learned to build a life in the spaces they never occupied. The firm operated with a quiet intensity, no unnecessary chatter, no wasted movements, only focused attention on work that demanded precision. I settled into that environment the way some people ease into warm water. For the first time, my instinct to double-check everything wasn't seen as overthinking. It was an advantage. My early projects revolved around reviewing legacy financial files for clients who had inherited tangled portfolios. Some records stretched back decades, scattered across dusty paper archives, outdated databases, and mislabeled folders. Most analysts found the work tedious, but to me it felt like assembling a structure only I could see. I built my own verification system, tracing asset trails like someone mapping the branches of a family lineage. The firm noticed the efficiency improvements almost immediately. By the end of my first year, I was leading small audit teams assigned to niche asset categories. I enjoyed the challenge, but what surprised me was how much I liked training new analysts. They reminded me of the quiet version of myself absorbing everything, waiting for someone to acknowledge their capability. Teaching them offered an unexpected sense of closure. I had grown into someone who could shape others, even if my own family never saw me that way. My salary wasn't extravagant, but it was steady. I saved meticulously, choosing a modest apartment near the office and keeping my routine simple. Evenings were spent cooking basic meals, updating budget spreadsheets, and reading case studies. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt stable in a way my childhood never had. Updates from home arrived sporadically. My parents rarely asked about my work unless it involved helping with something. Lila dominated every conversation, her shifting ambitions, dropped majors, fresh attempts. Each change produced new concern from my parents, who viewed every pivot as another hardship she needed protection from. Holiday visits revealed nothing had changed, except the extent to which Lila filled every corner of the house. My promotions barely registered. Praise was reserved for her. In my third year at the firm, I began taking on independent clients, private audits and valuation assessments work. I performed quietly on evenings and weekends, keeping every file separate from my firm responsibilities. The additional income wasn't something I planned to depend on, but it offered a cushion I quietly appreciated. Over time, that cushion grew into something substantial. I didn't flaunt it. If anything, I hid it without meaning to. I wore the same understated clothes, drove the same reliable car, and avoided conversations that might hint at how well my work was going. Part of that instinct came from privacy. The rest came from old habits formed in a childhood where blending in felt safer than being seen. As my savings grew, I made a decision that surprised even me. I bought a small townhouse in a quiet Santa Fe neighborhood. It wasn't extravagant, but it had clean architectural lines, warm sunlight filtering through wide windows, and enough space for a dedicated office. For the first time, I lived somewhere that carried no echoes of favoritism, resentment, or dismissal, only calm. The distance from my family widened naturally. I visited less often, partly because my work demanded more of me, partly because the emotional fatigue lingered after every trip. My parents didn't mention my absences unless they needed help. Lila rarely reached out unless she wanted advice she wouldn't follow or money she would never return. One evening, while finishing a private audit in my home office, a quiet realization settled in. As my life stabilized, theirs seemed to spiral around problems they refused to face. Their unspoken dependence on me grew, while their acknowledgement of my efforts shrank to nothing. By winter, the pattern was unmistakable. I had built a world defined by structure and accountability, while theirs still revolved around excuses and shifting expectations. Nothing explosive had happened yet, but a fracture felt inevitable. When December arrived, I moved through the season calmly. I agreed to spend Christmas at my parents' house without expecting anything. I brought my laptop to finish a valuation report before the holiday closed. The morning was peaceful, cinnamon in the air, relatives arriving with gifts. After helping with appetizers, I slipped upstairs to check a file upload. I didn't hear Lila enter. I only sensed her when she stepped close behind me, reaching for a cord she claimed she needed. I angled the laptop slightly out of habit, but not fast enough. Lila's eyes locked onto the financial dashboard glowing across my screen, the internal tracker I used for organizing my accounts, the total amount saved over years of work. She froze for a heartbeat, and the expression that followed wasn't confusion. It was opportunity. She walked downstairs with the laptop still in her hand, and before I could follow, her voice rose above the conversation. She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. She simply announced that I had been hiding money while everyone else struggled. By the time I reached the bottom step, half the room was staring at the screen she angled toward them. My savings weren't extravagant for my field, but to my family who believed I lived paycheck to paycheck, the figure transformed the room. Conversations died mid-sentence. A heavy quiet settled. My mother reacted first, insisting there had to be some mistake, that I couldn't possibly have saved that much alone. My father leaned closer to the screen, as if proximity would make the number more believable. Once the reality clicked, their tone shifted immediately. There was no curiosity about my work, or acknowledgement of the years that built that balance. Only entitlement. Lila suggested I could finally help her clear her debts and start fresh. My mother speculated about postponed expenses. My father muttered about fairness and family responsibility. None asked how I achieved it or why I hadn't shared it. The assumption was simple. What I had should be theirs. Their voices overlapped, filling the room with expectations that had existed long before my account balance appeared. When I didn't respond, Lila's irritation sharpened. My mother questioned my loyalty. My father framed my reluctance as selfishness. Each word revealed a truth I'd always understood but never heard aloud. Their love had conditions. I closed the laptop. The noise continued around me, but I felt detached, as if I were observing a scene rather than standing inside it. No explanation would shift what they believed they were owed. They didn't want understanding. They wanted access. Leaving the house felt instinctive. I stepped outside into the cold Santa Fe air, the quiet settling around me sharper than the wind. I walked to my car without looking back. By the time I turned onto the main road, my phone was vibrating non-stop calls flashing one after another, messages appearing in frantic bursts. Some were angry, some were pleading, some tried the old familiar guilt, polished from years of repetition. I didn't answer any of them. In the following days, the attempts continued. My parents argued that helping Lila was simply the right thing to do. Lila insisted I had betrayed her, as though my savings existed for her redemption. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly appeared with unsolicited opinions, each one convinced they understood my obligations better than I did. It was remarkable how quickly people felt entitled to someone else's effort once they believed it came without cost. I saved every message, forwarded them to my attorney, and requested a formal notice be drafted to establish boundaries regarding harassment and unsolicited demands. It wasn't vindictive. It was necessary. When the notice was delivered, the calls slowed, then tapered off entirely. The silence that followed wasn't warm, but it was honest. Weeks passed. I adjusted to the stillness, returned to work, and rebuilt the peace that had been interrupted that afternoon in my parents' living room. The distance between us wasn't rebellion. It was safety, an overdue correction to years spent absorbing responsibility they never returned. What surprised me most was the absence of grief. I didn't mourn the version of family I had imagined. That version had never existed outside my hope. What I mourned, briefly, was the time I had wasted trying to earn something that was never mine to receive. The next Christmas came and went without a call from them, and yet, the quiet felt more like freedom than loneliness. I made coffee, opened my laptop to a new set of client files, and realized I had stepped into a life built entirely through my own steadiness, my own systems, my own resilience. I learned something that stayed with me. You can love people deeply and still refuse to let them hurt you. Boundaries are not walls. They are doorways into becoming someone who no longer shrinks to fit old expectations. If my journey resonated with you, if you've ever carried the weight of being overlooked, underestimated, or quietly depended on, I hope you'll take a moment to share your thoughts below. Tell me what part of my story stayed with you, what you would have done in my place, or how you learned to reclaim your voice after years of being told to stay small. Every story shared in the comments becomes a reminder that none of us walk through these moments alone. And if you're facing something similar right now, here's the best advice I can offer. Protect the parts of yourself you worked hardest to build. Discipline, resilience, steadiness. Those qualities belong to you, not to the people who dismiss them. Setting boundaries doesn't mean shutting people out. It means letting yourself breathe in a world that tried to keep you tightly folded. You're allowed to choose peace over approval, growth over guilt, and your own future over someone else's expectations. Thank you for listening to my story. And before you go, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today?